CalPADS Error Resolution PSTS0694F2. CTE PSTS student must have a previous SCTE record. Okay, so what we have here is the CalPADS error list, and we're going to start with the two left columns. You find this information in CalPADS. It's the error number PSTS069F2 and the error name CTE PSTS student must have a previous STE record. All right, so the information that will help you resolve the error are the three fields to the right: error description, fields validated, and suggested resolution. Let's read the error description. If a PSTS education program participation type code is equal to 20 CTE, then the student must have a SET record in any of the previous academic years. The fields validated will tell us where to look for the discrepancy triggering the error. So we're going to look at the academic year ID in field 11.06. The CalPADS CFS identifies each record type with a numerical value. So 11.06 would be the SETE record, and then 17.07, which has the same field name, academic year ID, is the PSTS record. So we're going to compare the PSTS record and the SET record and identify that the SETE record, 11.06, is in a prior academic year to 17.07, not the same academic year, a prior academic year. We also are going to look at the education program type code for 20 to make sure that it's a CTE record. So those are the fields we're going to validate. It should be fairly simple. Two fields in the PSTS record and one field in the SCTE record. Suggested resolution, understanding the error. If PSTS education program participation type code is 20, then the student must have a SCTE record where the CTE pathway completion academic year ID is less than the submitted PSTS academic year. Less than is a mathematical term. We're going to say prior to or before. So the CTE pathway completion academic year has to be before the PSTS academic year. Now the suggested resolution. Confirm the student is a CTE completer and should receive a PSTS survey. If so, update the academic year in the PSTS record so that it is after the student's graduation and the CTE pathway completion academic year ID. Or update the SETE CTE pathway completion academic year ID so that it is less than the submitted PSTS academic year. At the very bottom, there's one last note. The CDD will only trigger where the PSTS academic year is equal to the current academic year. So the record only triggers for current year submissions. If you're making historical updates, this validation will not trigger. In the error list, you saw a reference to education program type code 20. That's in the PSTS record. It identifies students who are CTE completers and have post-secondary outcomes. And so you see in the definition, it says that an indication of a participation in career technical education program prior to completing the 12th grade. So it's just identifying the survey is for a CTE completer. We also take surveys at end of year 4 for special education students, and we will accept surveys for students in California Partnership Academies. This error, PSTS0694F2, will only trigger on those students that are identified as CTE students or CTE completers. The CalPAD user manual is a great reference for PSTS information. If you go to this post-secondary status section, scroll down a bit, you can see that there's a lot of information. It tells you that Fall 2 is for CTE completers. It identifies who should survey, and part of that identification is CTE pathway completers at any time during their grades 9 through 12, which falls in line with the validation. And then there's further information on how to identify a student who should be surveyed. There's also the CalPADS data guide. In special student populations and programs, we have CTE students, and in the data guide, you will see the definition for a CTE completer, part of which says students who are identified as CTE pathway completers on the SCTE file have completed the capstone course pathway. That we're looking for that SCTE file. Also, further down in that section, what are the CTE data elements when they are submitted? You can see that the student career technical education, the SET CTE file is a required file for CTE completers, and then after that, post-secondary status completers. So one thing is the SCTE would have been submitted when they became a completer, and then a year later, several years later, whenever they exit post-secondary education, that PSTS outcome file is submitted. So we're just highlighting that the data guide gives you an indication of the relationships between the files as well. Now let's look at causes for the PSTS 0694 F2 error. One cause will be the CTE completion record in the prior years is missing. So we are submitting a PSTS record for a student and there is no SCTE completion record. Another cause may be the PSTS record is simply being submitted for the wrong student. So we have a survey, perhaps they're not a CTE completer, perhaps they should not have a survey result, or perhaps they are a special education completer or a California Partnership Pathway completer. It's demo time! Let's look at how to resolve the PSTS 0694 F2 error. So we're going to look at the PSTS 0694 F2 error. CTE PSTS student must have a previous SCTE record. So we can see that there's 39 such errors. And we filter so that only this error is the subject of our focus. And you can always reference the error list to get an idea of the nature of the error. CTE PSTS student must have a previous SCTE record. If the PSTS education program participation type code is 20 CTE, then the student must have a SCTE record in any prior academic year. So we're looking at the academic year ID of the SCTE file, the Student Career Technical Education record, the academic year ID in the PSTS record, and then the education program type code identifying that the PSTS record is related to CTE. All right, so that's what we need to do. Under the suggested resolution, confirm the student is a CTE completer. We report CTE completers with an SCTE record when they complete the capstone. So that's why we allow any previous year. It could be their senior year, it could be their junior year, it could be their sophomore year, possibly their freshman year. So we're looking at a previous year for an SCTE record because we're saying this student has a post-secondary transition status for the CTE type, right? The participation program is CTE. And if they're PSTS, they have left secondary education. And so at some point along the way, they had to be reported as a completer. So we'll just open the record in a new tab, which we've done. So once on the student detail screen, we're going to first start by scrolling down and confirming that there's a post-secondary status record. So we can see it in academic year 24-25. It is Career Technical Education, Education Program Type 20. With this PSTS record in 24-25, in a previous year, we're expecting to see a SCTE record. So we open up the Student Career Technical Education container and we see that there is no such record. And so that's what's triggering the error. We never reported this student as a completer. So how did we survey the student? So if we scroll up and we open the Student Course Section container, and you're looking for SCSE records, because it's historical data, I don't know that it matters whether or not, as far as validations, that it's a SCSE record. Typically, you're looking for a SCSE, not a SCSE. And you can see that we have identified the state course codes that are CTE, the 7000 to 8000 series. So the easiest way to do that, the title of each of these columns is a sort. So that we have the highest state course code. Now we have the lowest. So now you see it's the 7000 series, 8000 series on the second page, right? The first page is the first one. And then we have the 7000. There's historical codes from when the student was younger that are not what we're concerned with. We're looking at the CTE code. So I went to the second page and they're listed. And so I don't know these codes offhand, and the names don't exactly tell me if any of them are a capstone. Because right now, you can do this, and I would advise you to look in your student information system and identify if the student was a completer. I'm looking to see if the student met the conditions of being a completer in CalPADS. So I see the student has taken several CTE courses where any of them a capstone. So you have to pull up the valid code combinations document. You can find that in the CalPADS user manual or on the CDE web portal on the CalPADS system documentation page. And then we navigate over to the course group master combos once we have the valid code combinations. And we're simply going to look if any of these courses are a capstone. So this looks like the highest number in this series. There's a 7921, a 7922. So that's where I'm going to start. I see a 7922. That is a capstone, and that's the value of the valid code combinations document. 7922, you can see it here. If it's a capstone course, it will say that. You can see below it is an introductory course, intermediate that's labeled concentrator, advanced, which is a capstone. So we can see 7921 was a concentrator course, 7922 was a capstone. This student took 7922 in 23-24, which was the previous academic year. In fact, a SETE record should have been reported for this student. You can add historical record. So to be able to report this PSTS record, we want to add that SETE record from last year. So as you add the record, you have to know the CTE pathway code. And so here we have the valid code combinations document. We know 7922 was reported health sciences. 198 is the pathway code. You scroll up, you can see the CTE pathway code is the name. We'll make it a little bit easier. This is the capstone course, pathway code 198. And so it kind of shows you the value of the valid code combinations document. So here we have the SETE modal. You're going to have to populate the school of attendance for which the student was a completer, the academic year ID for last year. Remember, it will default to the current year. So we want to set the academic year for the year in which they completed. And this has to match it. So the completion year and the academic year have to match because you should be submitting the completion record in the year that you completed. Since this is historical, we're going back this way, and then the CTE pathway code. And we post. So we refresh the screen, and as you can see, we now have the missing CTE completer record, the SETE record from last year. And then this year, this record should post. So that's the way you do it. What's unfortunate is you wanted to report this record, in the year which they complete, especially since this student has graduated as evidence of the PSTS record. So this student wasn't counted on the dashboard or would not have counted on the dashboard or identified in for CTE accountability such as Carls Perkins and CTIG and whatnot. But good luck. Hopefully this helps identify the requirements going forward. But just in case you do have a PSTS 0694 F2 error, this is how it would be resolved. Another option, if this student had not in fact graduated or had not been a completer, you would delete this record. They were improperly surveyed and the record is not needed in CalPATS.